Welcome to Cambridge Forum, discussing the new nuclear danger. I'm Jamie Paglia, Program Manager of the Forum. Cambridge Forum is now in its 36th season of bringing you live public programs for the discussion of the issues and ideas that are shaping our world. Moments after the attacks of September 11th, the U.S. Department of Defense went on DEFCON 2, its second highest state of alert, ready to launch thousands of nuclear weapons. Though the end of the Cold War was supposed to bring the threat of nuclear war to an end, our speaker, Dr. Helen Caldicott, contends that the threat has reappeared with the policies of the current Bush administration. Our government ties to weapons manufacturers fostering worldwide nuclear proliferation. Our U.S. actions at home and abroad bringing us closer to a nuclear crisis than we think. For 30 years, Dr. Helen Caldicott has been at the forefront of the anti-nuclear movement. A Nobel Peace Prize nominee and former director of the Physicians for Social Responsibility, she is the recipient of numerous peace awards, including the Gandhi Peace Prize and Integrity Award, and holds honorary degrees from 19 universities. Both the Smithsonian Institution and Ladies' Home Journal named her one of the most influential women of the 20th century. Among her body of written work are the landmark books Nuclear Madness and Missile Envy. Her latest effort, The New Nuclear Danger, George W. Bush's Military-Industrial Complex, serves as the basis for our discussion. Welcome to Cambridge Forum, Helen Caldicott.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction, and it's a joy to be back in Cambridge. I just have to tell you that I had a grandbaby delivered at 4 o'clock this morning, so I've had little sleep. If you'll go along with me and hope the old brain functions well. I wrote The New Nuclear Danger because I was alerted by someone some years ago to say that the threat of nuclear war hasn't gone away, and I thought that when the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down, that all our work had come to fruition and that we could all go home and rest, which is what I did. However, on reading a book called An Elusive Consensus by Jane Nolan, which I have referenced in this book, I found that when Bill Clinton got into office, he set up a nuclear posture review headed by Les Aspin, a former senator. And Aspin said, we don't need nuclear weapons anymore because Russia's our friend now. However, inconveniently, Aspin died within the first year of that review, and a young man called Ashton Carter took over, who was absolutely decimated by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At the end of the nuclear posture review, which they sabotaged, the weapons still stayed in place as they were in the 80s when we were so scared of nuclear war and the day after played and we had 1 million people in Central Park. But no one knows the weapons are still there. America's got 5,500 strategic weapons, those on missiles and the like, 2,500 of which are on hair trigger alert, and so does Russia, because Russia always does what America does. Hence, every second of every day, as in the 80s, we live on the edge of the nuclear precipice. We got within 10 seconds of nuclear war in 1995 when Yeltsin made an error, or the Russians did, thinking America had launched a first-strike nuclear war. And that's not paranoia. America still has a policy to fight and win a nuclear war against Russia. How do you do that? You knock out their eyes and ears, their satellites. You knock out the command center, which is Moscow. And then you launch your very accurate missiles from 18 Trident submarines with 24 missiles on them, each with 8 hydrogen bombs in them. You launch your 50 MX peacekeepers, called by Reagan the peacekeepers, each with 10 hydrogen bombs, and thousands of Minutemen III missiles, each with about 3 hydrogen bombs in them. So accurate are they that they land absolutely dead on center on all the Russian missile silos. If you miss a few, you're now building a nuclear missile defense system, or Star Wars, as Reagan called it, so that you can mop up a few remaining ones that happen to get launched, and then you've won a nuclear war. The fact is that that particular situation would create almost certainly nuclear winter and cover the Earth with a cloud so thick that it would block out the sun for up to a year is not factored into the discipline of the Pentagon, and it would cause the end of most life on the planet. So the missiles get killed, and billions of people being killed are called collateral damage. So the missiles are given really medical terminology being killed, but the people are really insignificant in the equation. So therefore, when Yeltsin noticed a missile being launched, which actually was launched by Norway with a weather satellite on top in January 1995, the Russians thought that America had naturally launched a nuclear war. So they were ready to launch their missiles because they don't want to lose the nuclear war by you destroying their missiles before they get launched. The fact is that both sides launching their missiles would also create nuclear winter and the end of life on Earth. So we live in a world of collective nuclear insanity, which has not changed since we were so disturbed in the 80s. That's why I wrote the book. The book is called The New Nuclear Danger, George Bush's Military-Industrial Complex, which before September 11th was actually called George Bush's Military-Industrial Psychosis and its Tragic Consequences. But because September 11th changed the psyche of this country, we had to change the title. So we were 10 seconds from nuclear war. How did that happen? The Russians picked up the fire coming out of the missile with their infrared detector on their satellite, their early warning satellite, and that loop took 15 minutes up to the satellite and down to Moscow. Then Yeltsin had 3 minutes to decide whether or not to press the buttons so your missiles would hit empty silos. And the missiles only take 30 minutes from woe to go on both sides. Nuclear was over in about an hour. So for the first time in history, the nuclear football was opened in Moscow, never been opened before, inside of the nuclear weapons codes. 10 seconds from that 3-minute interval, the missile veered off course, and they closed the computer. The Earth was 10 seconds from annihilation. In 1995, there was quite a large article about that in the New York Times, printed near the obituaries. Not like when 9 miners were rescued in Pennsylvania, and that was headlines in the New York Times. Why didn't they put the headlines, we were 10 seconds from nuclear annihilation? Therefore, I would contend the media is determining the fate of the Earth, and we are in a very, very, very dangerous situation. The rest of the book deals with the Bush administration, which is run by the military-industrial complex. 32 people in this administration come from Lockheed Martin and Boeing and TRW. Many of the rest come or are appointed by the Heritage Foundation, which is the right-wing advertising agency for Lockheed Martin and the other corporations. It's not a think tank, it's an advertising agency with very slick advertising. Hence, every time you turn on Jim Lehrer or Ted Koppel or the like, there are two people from the Heritage Foundation debating each other. It's the right wing debating the right consistently. So the people of America are not getting the truth, hence this book. However, I'm finding it difficult to get on the media too. I was on Oprah recently. They taped me for 30 minutes and I was cut down to 1 minute saying that I thought we were never closer to nuclear war than now. And that was used by two young men in suits, white men, who used what I said to justify going in to bomb and decimate Iraq. I was on Larry King with a man called Frank Gaffney from the Centre for Policy, I can't remember the exact title. He's a Star Wars aficionado from the Reagan era, very smooth and very rude. He said that I shouldn't be talking on television because I was an Australian. He also said that during the 80s I ranted about nuclear war, and I wasn't quick enough to say, well, ranting produced the Nobel Peace Prize. I find these people are very sexist because when they can't handle what I'm saying because I'm telling the truth, they attack me personally. Then I know I'm winning. Larry King turned to me, he said, these guys are dangerous. I said, yes, they're sinister, Larry. So when we came back on air again, he said, I'll have you back for half an hour. We need longer on this. And then he got Pamela Anderson on for an hour. I thought later that maybe I should have a breast implant as well so that I can spend an hour with Larry King talking about the medical consequences of nuclear war. Hence the media. That's another sociological comment about the media these days. So it's difficult to actually get the truth on the media. The administration is really mandated by the Heritage Foundation for all its policies, like Reagan was. The Heritage Foundation wrote the mandate for leadership for Reagan's first term of office and the mandate for leadership for his second term, and they enacted all their suggestions. I recount that, I think, in my book, A Desperate Passion, and also in Missile Envy. I met Reagan, you know, and he was really a Chauncey Gardner. Nice old man, but inappropriate to be president. This president is more inappropriate, though, because Reagan had a heart. And Reagan did get to work with Gorbachev, and together they did help to end the Cold War. This one is a little different, and clearly Reagan was the president. But this one isn't. I would suggest that Dick Cheney is the president, and he's been living underground for some time in a fallout shelter since September 11th. His wife, Lynn Cheney, was on the board of Lockheed Martin for 20 years. Rumsfeld, who Kissinger called the most ruthless man he's ever known, including global potentates, the Secretary of Defence, he is very close to Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin is the biggest company in the world, making weapons of mass destruction, including 5 layers of Star Wars, including the militarization and the nuclearization of space. America is about to dominate space, which is totally illegal according to the United Nations, because outer space is a global commons belonging to all of us, as is the moon. America is going to put colonies on the moon and mine it for rare minerals and totally own it, so they say. I write a lot about this in this book, and they call it full spectrum dominance. And one general said, make no mistake about it, it's not popular, but we are going to fight war in space and from space down to Earth, and quotes affect very many kills, like vaporized cities in a flash of light with particle beam weapons or laser beam weapons or the like. Missile defence is not going to work, but the Pentagon in their back pocket have hydrogen bombs, and so the best way to knock out Russian missiles veering through space, plus a whole lot of Mylar balloons that confuse your hit-to-kill vehicles, is to blow up a hydrogen bomb in space. If you do that, a huge surge of voltage is sent down with a wide diameter called electromagnetic pulse, which could knock out 6 western states of the United States of America, every wiring system and the like, or if it's blown up really high, knock out the whole of the United States. That's another thing the Pentagon doesn't look at. Doesn't accept nuclear winter or talk about it, although they know it's probably valid, and they don't talk about electromagnetic pulse because it spoils their nice war plans. The next thing I'll talk about is the Second Manhattan Project. Clinton bribed the nuclear weapons makers and scientists. They have tremendous power in this country. To say, if you allow the Non-Proliferation Treaty to be ratified by Congress, which it still has not been and won't be now under the Bush administration, we'll let you build more nuclear weapons. And he funded them to the tune of $5 billion for the next 15 years, and they are currently designing, testing, building new nuclear weapons, including bunker busters, pure fusion weapons, and the like. This project is bigger than the first Manhattan Project, which produced the first 3 nuclear weapons, and the whole nuclear arms race began. No one knows about that. The scientists belong to a kind of cult, and their rite of passage is to test a nuclear weapon. When they test the weapon, the scientist sleeps with the mechanisms to blow up the bomb the night before the weapon blows up in the desert. He sleeps with annihilation. And before the bomb is exploded, he talks about giving birth to the bomb. He talks about having labour pains and the need to push. And after the bomb is exploded, he talks about postnatal depression. This work is done by Hugh Gustafson, an anthropologist who spent time with the scientists out at Los Alamos, drinking in the pub with them after work, and at Lawrence Livermore Labs. These people need to be removed from their jobs for the public health of the people of the planet. The labs need to be closed down, and the scientists need to be redeployed, working out what the hell we're going to do with radioactive waste, which lasts for 500,000 years or more and will produce over time random, compulsory genetic engineering and epidemics of leukemia and cancer forevermore. They also need to be redeployed, solarising the whole of the United States, retrofitting every building to be a solar building, every new building is a solar building, harnessing the wind power. There's enough wind west of the Mississippi to supply the whole country with electricity, and they need to be redeployed to remove all SUVs from the roads that do 10 miles per gallon, because the Earth is dying, if not from nuclear war, from a whimper with global warming and the like, ozone depletion and the like. As well as talking about the 5 layers of Star Wars, I talk about all the relationships in the Pentagon with the military industrial complex and Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin, to a degree, is determining foreign policy. The State Department has been marginalised. America is spending 4 times now as much on Star Wars as it's spending on the State Department. Rumsfeld et al. Are defining foreign policy of this country along with Lockheed Martin people. It's good to have wars because it's good for business for Lockheed Martin, and currently this country is spending $400 billion a year on weapons and on death. America has no enemies, no state enemies. It's got a few crazy zealots that do some crazy things, and there are crazy zealots in this country too, like 70 million right-wing Christians who believe firmly in Revelations, if you watched Jerry Falwell recently on 60 Minutes, that the earth will be consumed in fire called Armageddon, and those people who are right-wing Christians and who believe this will be raptured up to meet Jesus in the sky. This sounds crazy, but John Ashcroft believes it, Reagan believed it, Weinberger believed it, and many people in this administration and the Republican Party believe it. So they're praying for nuclear war, and they're also very keen about Israel because it says in Revelations just before Armageddon occurs, all the Jews will be converted to instant Christianity and they're going to rise up and meet Jesus in the sky too. This sounds crazy. It's true. It is crazy as well. And they have tremendous power within the administration and the Republican Party, and you make no mistake about it, George Bush is going to fill the courts up with right-wing Christians. They're not Christians at all. They're deviants. And there will be no separation between church and state, and you've lost your country. And he's going to fulfil or fill some Supreme Court positions. So this country is in terrible strife, as is the whole world, because this country is determining the fate of the earth. I just want to end now, my time's running out, about Iraq. I write a lot about Afghanistan and the weapons of mass destruction that were used there. About 5,000 innocent people were killed with cluster bombs, with daisy cutters that suck people's eyeballs out of their sockets and rupture their lungs, by bombing from 40,000 feet in the air and killing people with the pilots never smelling blood or seeing the babies with their heads blown off. None of the terrorists came from Afghanistan. 15 came from Saudi Arabia and 4 from Egypt. Why did they bomb Afghanistan? Because George Bush I and Kissinger and James Baker in the Carlyle Group wanted to put an oil pipeline from the Caucasians down to the Indian Ocean. That's why. So what's happening in Iraq? Iraq does not have any nuclear weapons. Cheney says it doesn't, so does the CIA. If it's got a few biological and chemical weapons, America knows about it because it gave Hussein these weapons to fight Iran during the 80s. America gave Hussein nerve weapons, nerve gas weapons, and he used them on the Iranians and on some Kurds with the blessing of Cheney and Rumsfeld, who were in power at the time. They also gave him anthrax, they gave him botulinus, and possibly they gave him smallpox, because why are they scared of smallpox? At the end of the 1970s, we had eradicated smallpox from the face of the planet. There were 2 small vials of smallpox, one in America and one in Russia. So did America supply Hussein with smallpox? It's not beyond belief. I would suggest that that's probably a very strong possibility. Hussein is a CIA man, armed, financed and equipped by the CIA. He happened, though, to nationalise the oil. 10% of the oil in the world is in Iraq. There's a man in the Pentagon called Paul Wolfowitz, who this is his baby. Since Bush was elected, he's wanted to go into Iraq. I don't know why, but Israel wants to do it too, because I heard Shimon Peres talk the other day at the Fortune magazine conference in Aspen, and he said, yes, we want them to go into Iraq. Then the next one is Iran. There was a paper written in 2000 for Cheney and Rumsfeld et al. Saying that America is going to produce regime changes in Iraq and Iran and Libya, possibly China. How dare she? How dare she? And Bush says, well, Hussein wasn't democratically elected. Neither was he. You know, maybe, can you imagine if a saint said, well, I think we need a regime change in America? It's the same morality. And let me tell you that the CIA deposed my Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, in 1974. And how do you think I feel about that? The best Prime Minister we ever had. How dare they? This country has no right to be marauding around the world doing its will in other countries. It should stick to its own country and look after its own people. Like 41% of people have no health insurance. 41 million people have no health insurance in the richest country on earth. Spending $400 billion a year on weapons of mass destruction. The country with the greatest numbers of weapons of mass destruction is the United States. They're currently working on biological weapons now at Los Alamos, doing genetic engineering on 24 different bacteria to make them more virulent and resistant to antibiotics. They say they're doing it for defensive purposes. It's got the greatest stockpile of chemical weapons and nuclear weapons. I think we should have some civilian weapons inspectors going and checking up what's going on here. And what this country does is a model for every other country in the world. So if it builds a Star Wars system, Russia says, well, we'll build thousands more weapons to supersaturate your Star Wars system. And so does China. That provokes vertical proliferation, and as the labs are building new nuclear weapons, other countries, like maybe even mine in Australia, say, well, we'll build nuclear weapons too. And then you get lateral proliferation, like North Korea. Why shouldn't they have nuclear weapons if America's got so many, like 15,000? Why shouldn't they? So then you get the nuclear cross with vertical and lateral proliferation, upon which I suggest we could all be crucified. The war in Iraq, or the massacre in Iraq, which killed up to 250,000 people in 1991, was a radiological war, a nuclear war. America used up to 800 tons of uranium anti-tank shells, which are 1.7 times more dense than lead. They slice through the armour of a tank like a hot knife through butter, but they spontaneously burn, producing tiny particles less than 5 microns that can be inhaled into the terminal bronchi. Carcinogenic alpha emitters. Also, this uranium was polluted with traces of plutonium, strontium-90 and cesium, because it was a reprocessed uranium from old reactors in nuclear submarines. Very deadly carcinogens. The incidence of childhood cancer in Basra, where the weapons were used, has gone up 6 to 12 times. Little girls of 10 are getting breast cancer. My colleagues can't treat their patients because they can't get any drugs because of the sanctions. So the patients die untreated. The incidence of congenital deformities has doubled and tripled. Women are terrified to give birth. They're giving birth to monsters with single eyes, cyclopses, babies with no brains, anencephaly, babies with spina bifida, and the like. But uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. As well, the sanctions have produced tremendous malnutrition. America on purpose bombed the water supplies, the sewage systems and the electricity supplies. That's a war crime. It goes against the Geneva Accords. So the children have been drinking polluted water, diarrheal diseases are rife, and the doctors have no drugs. Every month since 1991, 5,000 children have died in Iraq. Combination of diarrheal diseases, malnutrition, other infectious diseases, cancer and leukemia. That's a war crime. Thou shalt not kill children. When they go in again, and they will, they'll use more of these weapons, these radiological weapons, and I think there's a 50-50 chance they'll use a nuclear bunker buster, a real nuclear weapon, which could trigger, by mistake, the early warning system of Russia, which I described in 1995. And if Russia launches her nuclear weapons because she's scared and paranoid because of America's first strike, then we have a nuclear war globally, and that will produce nuclear winter and the end of life on Earth. If America doesn't use a nuclear weapon, Israel may, because they've intimated if Saddam Hussein sends Scuds toward Israel, that they may respond with nuclear weapons. So George Bush, who I'm sure hasn't read this book and doesn't know most of the data in it, if they go into Iraq and he's getting very belligerent and cocky, as you notice, it could mean the end of life on Earth. Not a high probability, but it's not zero. Any war in the world now could trigger a thermonuclear holocaust. And Einstein got it right when he said the splitting of the atom changed everything, save man's mode of thinking. Thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. We have never been in greater danger, ever, in our 3 million years of inhabiting this planet. And don't forget, we cohabit it with 30 million other species that have even more right to exist than we, because we've built these things. So maybe I'll stop here. I think I've gone my 20 minutes, and let's take some. I've tried to be provocative so that you will ask lots of questions. Thank you.
You are listening to Dr. Helen Caldicott discussing the new nuclear danger. The floor is now open for audience questions.
Thank you, Helen. I really appreciate your sacred message, because the truth is all that we need to set us free. And so few people have Paul Tillich's courage to be. And that's what we're really, it's a spiritual void that we've created with our insane greed. And we're beginning to see, your message is the most elegant and beautiful spiritual one I've heard since I heard Martin Luther King in person. Yes. Now my question, actually a few weeks ago, Senator John McCain was here, and I heard him speak. And what I asked him about was the spread of prions around the world, particularly in the United States with the deer wasting disease. And the fact that mad cow disease, they're not able to do in England certain elective surgeries because they can't sterilize the surgical instruments. And Yale has found that some 10% of Alzheimer's patients have the same holes in the brain as occurs with a spongiform prion.
10% of all what patients?
Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the hidden pathogen, besides our spiritual failings, is to, there's no way, because there's no DNA and RNA, to deal with the prions. And it is spreading in wildlife as well as Alzheimer's, other conditions. I wonder if you could speak to how we might deal with the prion crisis.
I absolutely don't know. First of all, you mustn't feed sheep products to beef, because they need those two species to be infected. I'm very wary about eating beef here, because they feed beef with all sorts of stuff. I mean, awful stuff. But someone said it was sterilized before the beef eat it. But as you point out, sterilization doesn't kill the prions. I do know several neurological surgeons who've died of spongiform encephalopathy or Jacob Creutzfeldt's disease. So it's scary, but, you know, I have to say to you that bringing this up in the context of destroying life on the planet is a form of displacement activity. And if you put rats in a cage and threaten them with a lethal situation, they tend to run around and do something totally irrelevant to that which threatens them. What I've presented to you is something, is the most profound message, I guess, that anyone has ever presented. While I appreciate your question from a medical perspective... Well, no, I'm just saying death is death. And the hidden factor, I think what you brought out is we don't know all that you've revealed. Right. It's the same thing with the prion. I'm just saying that there are multiple factors that we're not being honest. I agree, but we could talk about many other diseases too, although prions are very scary. But, you know, we're talking about the end of the creation. I know. Yeah. Thank you. I don't think algae get prions. What? I don't think algae get prion disease. It comes from, it's systemic. Yeah, all right. Soil. Well, maybe they do. Okay. Thanks. But they wouldn't get mad cow disease. Anyway, I'm being facetious. Yes.
Hi, I'd like to say thank you. I learned an awful lot that I didn't know before. And I'm very sympathetic to the anti-nuclear position, always have been. I'm also offended by your anti-American position. And while we are so powerful and do have to set a model, I'm also aware, after having lived in Europe, mostly Britain, for many, many years, that Europeans are continuously decreasing their defense budgets because they expect that we'll come over and save them from their frequent genocides. From what? From their genocides. We went over in Bosnia, we went over in World War II. I'm not a historian, but I read the papers, and I know from reading on that side of the Atlantic and on this side, that Europe waits for us to take care of their military problems. I'm also not an apologist for the Lockheed Martin and these other places that you're talking about. In fact, I learned an awful lot from your talk. However, I think that being so powerful and creating a lot of envy in the world, not so much for our material prosperity, I think, but for our confidence, which they misconstrue as arrogance, I think that you would make a better argument because you have so many facts that people do need to know about, particularly people who are not sympathetic to this position. I think that if you took a more lenient view of America, given that if you made such a speech in Iraq or in Afghanistan about their government, I dare say that you probably wouldn't get to see your great-great-grandchild who was born today. So I think that you should thank American democracy and freedom of speech for allowing you to say these things. Please continue to teach us about these important things, but don't hate the only country on earth that allows you the freedom to do it.
Okay, first of all, I don't hate America. I wouldn't be here if I did. Number one. No, let me finish this.
Let her respond, please.
Yeah. Number two, this country is full of millions of kind, loving, caring people who desperately want to do the right thing. Number three, we had a revolution in the 80s. When I first started speaking in 78, almost every person said to me, it's better to be dead than red. And I said, yeah, but really? And they said, yeah. So we said, well, do you know what happens if a bomb drops on Boston? No. So we described the medical effects of nuclear war. In 5 years, 80% of people became convinced that nuclear war was bad for their health. And they rose up, and we helped to bring about the end of the Cold War. What I'm saying now, I'm not talking really about the American people. If you thought I was, I apologise. I'm talking about the present administration who has hijacked your country. I'm not talking about the people. You are in a most invidious and dangerous position. And if you read this book about the major players in this administration, you have no say about your country. I mean, I could easily be put in Guantanamo Bay. I read the other day on the internet that people who are in the Green Party are being prevented from flying. I'm scared I mightn't get to Canada in 2 days' time. And if I end up in Guantanamo Bay, the publisher says it'll be great for the book, but will you come and see me?
I would like to know what you would... You know, when you talked about crazy Christians, some of the way you talk sounds like that, but from a different position. I wish that you would just name the facts and not all the others. Some of us do have, we do have a free vote here. What I would like to know is...
A free what?
I'm going to stop you because we have a lot of people that want to talk.
Yeah.
I think you've made your point very clearly.
Am I saying politically incorrect things?
No, it's just that there is a whole queue behind you.
I would just like to ask one question, really.
Quickly.
How would you suggest that America deal with the attack of September 11th and the terrorism that follows and is continuing to follow from that?
Fine, thank you. And first of all, I do want to say that these right-wing Christians are crazy because they're praying for Armageddon to come. And if you were a psychiatrist sitting on Mars saying they're praying for a nuclear war and the end of life, the only life in the universe, you'd have to say that that was a form of insanity.
No, I agree with you.
Okay, thank you.
But you sound a bit extreme, too.
I sound extreme? I don't think that's extreme to call people who are praying for Armageddon a nuclear war.
You're not extreme for
that.
What
did
stop.
I do about September 11th?
Yeah, I'm going to stop and let her answer the question that you asked, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was in Eau Claire, Wisconsin on September 11th. I saw the planes fly in. I'd just flown in from Australia. I had to address 3,000 people that night at the university. And I thought, what am I going to say? And it's a very big Christian area there, and I don't think they're right-wing, those Christians I talked about. I think they're real Christians, following probably what Jesus preached. So I didn't know what to say. These people filed in with ashen faces in a deep state of shock. So I got out the Bible, and I found what Jesus said in Luke, and I said, now, look, being a Christian doesn't mean going to church on Sundays or going up to heaven when you die. It means living what the man preached. So I read to them, love thine enemy, do good to those who hate you. Period. any vengeance is antithetical to the salvation of the planet in the nuclear age. That's what Einstein meant. We have got to stop fighting and killing. Thou shalt not kill. Period. We are not to kill each other. Period. And if someone wants to kill me, they can. I'm never going to kill anyone else. I took the Hippocratic Oath.
Then you should call yourself a pacifist.
Thanks.
Next question, please. Thank you.
I see in your book where you talk about depleted uranium. We had a Veterans Day multi-state tour the last few days. It's still going on. And we had a speaker called Major Doug Roque, and he mentioned the number of Gulf War veterans that are on disability.
Yep.
And the figure was like 160,000. And 10,000 that have died since the war. And even among his crew that went over there, the team members, 30 of the 100 of them have since died, and all but one of the rest of them are sick. So could you comment on this?
Did they die mostly of malignancies? I think they did they not? I've read his...
I cannot give you the details.
Yeah. Yes, I can comment. Many of the veterans, American veterans who went there, are excreting uranium in their semen. And there's a reported increased incidence amongst their children of congenital anomalies because, of course, in the semen are the sperm, and in the sperm are the genes, which are damaged by alpha radiation. Uranium is a heavy metal, apart from being radioactive, and it's excreted through the kidney, as is lead. And so it can cause renal damage, but also renal cancer and cancer of the bladder, and also apparently is getting into the semen. So if it's in the semen of the vets, it's in the semen, of course, of the Iraqi men, and hence the incidence of congenital deformities there. It's a very serious thing, and in fact, in my book I recount Pentagon documents talking before the Gulf invasion about that people who go in to fight using this material must be totally covered, wear respirators, the whole thing, and they talk about the diseases that can be caused by depleted uranium, and there are many, and if you read the book, it's there. They didn't do any of those things. They didn't protect their troops. But you know what? I'm more concerned about the people in Iraq. Because they're innocent. I mean, if people join the military and go over, they know that they're going to be exposed to whatever or could be killed. But these innocent people, I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night at the moment in a hot sweat, imagining the mothers, and I've got a new baby in the hospital at the moment, bathing their babies and feeding them and swaddling them and putting to bed. And in a few weeks, shards of hot metal will be slicing through those babies' bodies. I can't help but look at this as a paediatrician and as a doctor, but I also think that you were lied to. I don't think you were. You were not warned of any of this stuff. And still, there's a huge press cover-up about depleted uranium in this country. I wrote 2 articles in the New York Times. They wanted them. Then they said, we are unable to print this. And I thought, who said they couldn't? Then I heard that sometimes they send such things to the State Department. There's a huge furor in Europe about it. The European Parliament's up in arms because the peacekeepers from Italy and Spain and the like are getting higher than normal incidences of malignancies. So the press there's a lot of press there. There's none here, except I got an article the other day in the San Francisco Chronicle and Baltimore Sun. So you need to know that your Pentagon is covering up this extremely important information, and I know that if the American people knew about this, they would stop the invasion of Iraq. They would stop it. Incidentally, I just read yesterday that they used, I've never seen the data before, up to 1,000 tons of the material in Afghanistan. And they're exporting these weapons all over the world.
Well, just finished up with this. His story was horrendous to hear what he's been through, because they turned the IRS on him, and they fired him from the job, and he's had threats on his life, he's had shootings on him. And here's the fellow they sent over. He was the head of the team they sent over in '91 to clean up over there.
Who fired him, the Pentagon or who?
Whoever was on top of him. That's as close as I can come to the answer to that one.
Okay, well...
But anyways, and he went in about missing files, and it's typical what went on in Vietnam, Agent Orange, and the rest of it. It's nothing.
Bad.
There's nothing new under the sun. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. If we could try to make sure that we keep our questions concise, that would be great. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. Thank you.
What do we do?
Yeah, well, you've got to have a revolution. As Gore Vidal says, you've got one political party with two right wings, and that was so apparent in this election last week. We had a revolution. You've had two American revolutions. One was when you shot the redcoats, and the second one was in the 80s, when we mobilised 80% of Americans. It was quiet, sagacious, peaceful, wise, and we prevailed. And even though that Reagan didn't want to do it, he had to actually work with Gorbachev. So now we've got to finish the work. When I wrote the book, thought we've got to take on the right wing and the media. The media is determining the fate of the Earth. So I'm setting up the Nuclear Policy Research Institute to have an office in Washington with the best PR person I can find, communications person, so that every time Rumsfeld's on or Cheney, we're on. Or never again did the Heritage Foundation go on alive. We're there giving the opposite point of view, because every time I'm on television, the producers ring me and say, we've got to have the opposite point of view. OK, we have both points of view. The truth will out. Americans will start debating, discussing, and they'll rise up and say, OK, that's it. You've got to take your country back from the corporations. Now, the drug companies spent $16 million on this election, the drug companies, and as a physician that takes my breath away. You know, they're running the insurance companies that run the HMOs, and they're telling us what we can and can't prescribe. And they don't want generic drugs, cheap drugs for you. And then I could go on. The whole congressional elections were run by the corporations. And even when the Democrats were talking, when the CEOs were doing bad things and they found out, they were still flying around in corporate jets. So the politicians are corporate prostitutes, and the White House is, and they don't represent you. And you're the leaders in a democracy, and they are your representatives. And you've got to have the courage of your convictions and turn into Johns and Joans of Arc. And if I've done what I can do in this country, I'm not even American. I'm an alien. And I'm a woman. And I'm naive and sort of stupid. And I said, we can get rid of nuclear weapons, and by God, we almost did. But now we've got to finish it. So my goal is to end the nuclear age in the next 5 years. Close down the 103 reactors here that are all targets for terrorists. They don't need nuclear weapons. They're deployed conveniently for them all over the country. And get rid of the weapons with Russia, who doesn't want them anyway. France, England, China have said they'll do the same. Israel would have to be forced to. India and Pakistan would be easy. And then, then you can easily, or the United Nations can then police the world to make sure, with peacekeeping operations and the like, that countries don't build nuclear weapons. And then at least we won't die in a thermonuclear holocaust. So that's my goal. I need $800,000. Rosie O'Donnell gave me $100,000 the other day. If anyone knows anyone who can give that sort of money or a little less, or anyone's here who could and want to save the world, I'd be very grateful. This organisation, this organisation will create a massive grassroots movement by working at the treetops level, by talking to 20 million people in one go, And then what do we do with the grassroots movement? Well, my organisation, Women's Action for New Directions, is still going, very effective. You can join that. The churches need to get going again. The Catholic bishops are in desperate need of redemption. And it's time they rewrote a new pastoral letter. What would Jesus do? The Methodist bishops, they need to get going too, the Southern Baptists, the Mennonites, you name it, because this is the ultimate spiritual issue. Does the creation survive, or do we destroy it? And then the educators and everyone. We need to get going again. I know we don't want to, and we're tired, but in 5 years we're going to end the nuclear age, and we're going to rise up, and you all need to start running for politics, especially the women. 53% of us are women. We're not the minority, we're the majority. We do 2/3 of the world's work, for which we earn 10% of the income and own 1% of the property. We have all the babies, and that's without a doubt. And it's now time that a mandate was passed that 53% of all organisations are women. Good ones, bad ones, but the magic number is 30%, below which they tend to vote for missiles to please the men. Above that, They are mutually reinforcing, and they say, no, no more missiles, we're voting for milk for children. France has just passed a parity law that 50% of all people running for elected office are women. So I think that's another thing, and then I could go on with lots and lots of ideas. In the back of this book there are all sorts of organisations you can join, or you can do your own thing and become your own Jones and Johns of Arc. Okay?
Thank you. You answered the question.
Thank you.
Here in Boston, there was a Tea Party in 1774 after the 1773 Tea Act, which most people think was just an additional tax on tea, but actually was a British government subsidy of the East India Tea Company.
Right.
Just like Walmart. You know, they come in and they undercut prices. And the reason of the Tea Party was so that the colonial commerce wouldn't be bankrupt by the East India Tea Company. When you say get rid of the corporations, everybody looks dumbfounded, I think. Do you have any clues about how to get rid of the corporations?
What I meant, and I'm sorry I didn't explain it properly, was get rid of them out of politics. And I'll use the example of Australia. At home, voting is compulsory. If you don't vote, you get fined $100. That should be mandated immediately. The post office has all your names and addresses. You can register you immediately, and you're all mandated to vote. And if you don't, you get fined a hefty fine. Number one. Number two, our campaigns are 3 weeks long. That's great. It's hot and heavy for 3 weeks and it's over. Number three, the government tends to fund our campaigns. And I've run 3 times now. And that's what needs to happen, so that if, you know, the poor things, as soon as they're elected, they're campaigning, they're trying to raise money again for the next campaign. The whole thing has to change, and they haven't got the guts to do it. No one is stepping out except Paul Wellstone. So I mean remove them from politics. Now that's a big ask, but if you don't, you won't have a country anymore. You will not have you virtually don't have a democracy now, do you? Yeah.
As you travel so much and you speak around the country of the United States, do you come across organizations that are, I mean, aside from clean elections, which is what you've just described, corporate charters or reforming, subordinating the corporation to the democratic will of the people? Do you find any organizations doing that?
Yeah, there is one, and I can't remember its name. The people, I think, are in Connecticut. But in many states, what's it called? Right. Okay, so see this gentleman afterwards. Corporations have to be given a mandate, and I can't remember exactly what the terminology is, by each state. And if they overstep the law, they can be deregistered in the state. That's very important, and you need to learn about that, number one. Number two, the Supreme Court called the corporations, gave them the right of an individual, which is absolutely ridiculous. They're not individuals. They're amorphous masses of people whose bottom and top line is money, and you see that every day in the New York Times. There's someone else indicted. There's no milk of human kindness in the corporations, none. And, I mean, it's just so obvious. I mean, capitalism doesn't work. You know, you start off with 50 auto companies, and they eat each other up, and then you have 3, and one of them goes bankrupt, Chrysler. So what happens? You have socialism for the rich, and your money is used to pay out and look after Chrysler, and to hell with the ordinary people. So it's socialism for the rich and capitalism for all of us. That ain't capitalism. It's ridiculous. So I believe, well, we've always in Australia had a happy mix blend of socialism and capitalism, where people were careful and had their corporations or their firms, but they looked after their employees. I mean, our basic wage is $11.75 an hour. We never tip. We don't have to, because people work with dignity. Now, it's being undermined by GATT and WTO and the transnationals at the moment, which is very serious. But, you know, that's what Jesus preached, socialism. He was a socialist. Oh, but that's a naughty name. You're not even allowed to say liberal these days. How pathetic. You know, that's pathetic. Socialism means caring for people. It means generosity. It means the Good Samaritan. It means, you know, it's more difficult for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven than a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. It means your tax dollars are used for you and not being stolen by Lockheed Martin, which is the new robber baron. If you spent $1,000 a minute since Jesus was born, you would have just spent $1 trillion. And that's what's spent half of that every year on death, because the Pentagon's about death. An admiral said to me once, he said, Helen, our mission is to destroy property and kill people. And I would submit the Pentagon needs to be dismantled. Who's going to invade America? I mean, people rowing up in rowboats and landing on the shore and saying, today you're a communist or something. Anyway, that's gone by the board. And you've got friendly countries to the north and south, but the Pentagon's writing articles about the fact that Canada might turn nasty and invade you. That's called clinical paranoia. And I think all the military expertise should be transferred to the United Nations, and that we work with the family of the human race together with 180 nations, and we develop humility and respect, and we transfer our brilliance and expertise for peacekeeping operations. Imagine in the Middle East if we sent in a UN peacekeeping team and separated the warring parties. No more blood. And you leaders sit down at a table and we're locking the door and you're not getting out until you've worked out how to live together in peace. And both of you can concede and work out conflict resolution. I mean, we all know how to do that, and that's called civilization. Right? Yes.
Hi.
How are you?
So glad to be here. I just want to ask everyone in the audience here to turn around and look at each other for a minute, because I think that, just look at each other. Look around.
People are embarrassed to do that.
Why
do you want them to do it?
We have to get embarrassed.
No, you can't do that.
Let's have a question,
please. Yeah, what's your question?
That's it, is that we have all, this few of us who are in this room, have had the privilege and the blessing of hearing the incredible store of knowledge that you have, which vast millions of people need to know. And when you've been doing what you've been doing since 1978, when I heard you at the Kennedy School and we started the Women's Party for Survival, which became one, and you said it's going to take a grassroots movement. And I am a Bostonian, and I've been in Boston for 40 years, and I've been working in the neighborhoods with the kids and all. And it's about us knowing each other, and it's about us bonding in this moment of our privilege, and knowing that we have to take the privilege of having heard you and knowing about this book and walk out of here and get strength from the fact that we are here. Don't be embarrassed to see who's here, so who you see.
But maybe,
and it's breaking down. It's breaking down here it is. It's a pyramid of power that we have.
Let's let her respond, please.
Yeah. I just want to finish this point. We are sitting in an audience hearing from the expert. When Helen leaves Boston, we need to have a council, a summit where we can talk and organize and meet each other and bond. When she goes and we don't have her presence and her courage. And so I just want to say to you that this moment that you bring us, this privilege that you bring us, this knowledge that you bring us is, and you have a plan, and I'm going to get the book, and we're all going to get the book, right? And we're going to share it with our friends, right?
Okay, let me answer. Let me answer.
Thanks.
Some people are embarrassed. 1. 2, some people are very private. 3, when you hear this, it's so god-awful, people go into the stages of grief. The first stage is shock and disbelief. Like the first question, I said some Christians are crazy, or whatever. So it's like you're told a very lethal diagnosis, pancreatic carcinoma, and you say, well, she's, one of her facts was wrong, I'll get a second opinion. That's the first stage of grief, and people need the privacy to go through that. The next stage is profound depression, and people might take 2 years. It's idiosyncratic how long that takes to go through. That's a private thing. The next stage is anger, and the anger can be focused to be extremely productive. I'll give you an example. A woman heard me talk 20 years ago and got such a profound shock and was so depressed she couldn't get out of bed for 2 years, virtually. No one helped her, she had no friends, but she didn't need them. She had to go through the pain. And as Jung said, the avoidance of legitimate suffering is a cause of all mental illness. It's pain, psychological pain, that induces spiritual and psychological growth. and it's appropriate and necessary. It's important to know that 30% of Americans are on antidepressants because they want to avoid pain. Now, sometimes they're important, antidepressants, but it's very important to feel this enormous despair, and out of that comes creativity. So this woman woke up one morning 2 years later, and she suddenly realised what she had to do. No one told her, and she didn't work it out with her left brain. She got dressed, put on her pearls, and went to the Heritage Foundation. Knocked on the door, and they said, "Who are you?" She said, "I'm Joan." She got a job there for a year. They paid her very well. And at night when they went home, she went through all their files, all their records, all their funding, and all their policies, and found out what they were really up to. And then she said, "Thank you very much," and set off on a pilgrimage across America, a crusade, speaking in thousands of churches and synagogues to teach. Now, that wouldn't have happened had she been in a group. I'm not terribly keen about groups, except when people are really into it, like we were with Physicians for Social Responsibility or WAND. It's important. Each one of us has an answer, and none of us have the answer at the moment because the world's heading towards annihilation. And so I would encourage you, if you need to support each other, good. If you need to stay private and silent and go through this and be spoken to by your intuition, because the answer will come from your gut, do it. Okay. You have to go.
So
you have
let's
to
have
go
our next
because there are
question,
people
please.
behind you.
Let's have our next
Yeah.
question, please. We have other people in line.
Yeah.
I'm glad you spoke about those feelings because I'm trained to observe my feelings as I sit and listen to someone speak. And the one that I was feeling very strongly, as you talked about how we let this country do what it has done and become what it has become, was shame.
Yeah.
And shame was just causing me terrible pain sitting there in my seat. And then it was very familiar to me because I've gone through it before. I've looked at Wounded Knee. I've looked at the slave trade. I've looked at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And shame is something that is very disempowering. And so I don't know how many other people fell silent because of shame and wanted to retreat. But I don't think it's a very constructive feeling, and I think there's something deeper than shame that we can get at.
I'm sorry, do you have a question also?
I do, because
okay.
I think
let's
she knows
let's get to
about that.
Please.
Yeah. I'd like to know, well, my thought is that anger and fear are more positive, and if you get out and do something and take a stand, you do begin to work through it. But I know you've suffered with some feelings yourself, and I wondered if you had some answers.
I think I'm terribly ashamed to be an Australian at the moment. We're locking up refugees in concentration camps. My country is extremely racist, and I feel so embarrassed. And I've always been so proud to be an Australian. So I know how you feel. But underneath that is profound anger. Mm-hmm. And I'm damned if I'm going to let my country go to the dogs, you know, although I don't have much say there now. It's very misogynist. And I'm damned if anyone's going to kill my grandchildren or the children of the planet. So that sort of indignation and anger and absolute passion and love for the planet drives me. Mm-hmm. And if I stop doing this work, I get so depressed I actually have to take antidepressants. It happened to me. I thought, well, I'm a grandma. I'll go into my garden, look after my grandchildren. I was weeping the whole time, and then I realised that unless I do this work, because I'm not good at denial and psychic numbing, it overwhelms me. And I have this sense that when I'm doing the work, maybe I'm helping, and I think I am. And we all need to do that. It makes you feel terrific. If you get up in the morning and decide you're not going to spend a day without doing something to save the planet. And when people say they've got no time, that doesn't wash. I led the movement against French nuclear tests in Australia, and I was a young paediatric intern working 80 hours a week with 3 children, 3 little children. So there's always time. I mean, just imagine if your child got leukemia. What sort of passion would you sell your house? If your grandchild got leukemia, you'd end up with no money but find the best doctor in the world, and if the child died, you'd never get over it. That's what I'm talking about, that passion. And it's not to worry about, well, I feel awful, you know, maybe I better work on my feelings. To hell with how you feel, you just bloody do it. You know? And it's interesting, when I talk to Australians, they're very quiet and they're pretty cynical and they don't say much. But they hear it and they get up, you never see them again because they're out fixing it. Whereas I find a lot in America, people say, you've made me feel awful. As if it's un-American to feel awful. You know, take a pill, here's your Tylenol, where's your drink, you know. Everything but to have feelings. And then they say, well, tell me what to do. No one's ever told me what to do. I just know what to do, you know. If I try and contrive what to do, though, it never works. If I try and work it with my left brain, it never works. It's got to be an intuitive thing. And I know when I'm on the right path, when everything starts falling into place, like when Rosie O'Donnell gives me $100,000, I know I'm on the right track. And it's got to be done with a lot, well, I don't know. I mean, I feel a lot of love at the moment. And you know, especially now, these last couple of days when it's been so warm and the leaves have fallen and the colours in the leaves on the ground, like painting, and the smell of the leaves and the smell of autumn. And we're so lucky to be here. It's such a beautiful place. And I wrote a book called If You Love This Planet. If we love it, we'll save it. So that can be mixed with anger towards people who might be working to destroy it. And I think we need to redefine the English language. We're conservatives, because we're for conserving life on Earth. And those who would work to destroy it, they're radicals. And they need to be removed from office for the public health of the people of the planet. Seriously.
Hi.
Hi.
I wish you luck with your media campaign.
Thank you.
I think you're facing an uphill battle on two fronts, and that your message isn't happy and syrupy and will have trouble making the news, because the news seems to be more towards entertainment rather than facts these days. And you also face the threat of being called, as you saw this evening, un-American, or if you were American, unpatriotic, which is a symptom of today's climate. My question is about Iraq's so-called weapons of mass destruction. I recently saw a book buried in a bookstore. It was written by 2 UN weapons inspectors. And basically what they were saying was that Iraq no longer has the capabilities because VX gas has a shelf life of 5 years and it was all destroyed during the Gulf War. And as an add-on to that, I'm not sure if you saw the news this evening, but Iraq accepted the UN conditions, but the White House said if any part of their acceptance letter proves to be incorrect or dishonest, they see that as a reason to strike militarily. So basically my question would be, do you think Iraq has any means of delivering or possessing large-scale weapons at this point?
Iraq's got about 15 Scud missiles that it didn't use in 1991. It may have some biological or chemical materials. They're not weapons of mass destruction. But why doesn't America look at itself in the mirror? I mean, how dare it accuse, and then it'll say Iran. I mean, it's on a rampage. This administration is on a rampage to take over the world. And Cheney said, well, we're going to keep fighting wars for the next 20 years. We're going to invade 60 countries. We're going to use nuclear weapons with impunity anywhere we want, which is antithetical to anything the United States has ever said before. And it's great, I mean, he didn't say, but it's great for business. Richard Pearl, who is behind Rumsfeld, who was called by his colleagues in the Pentagon in the Reagan era the Prince of Darkness. He said, we're going to keep fighting wars for the next 20 years and one day our children will sing songs in our praise. I've got that in the Australian edition, a direct quote. He sounds like Hussein. So everyone's got some weapons. So what? This has got nothing to do with any rationality. This is absolutely, totally irrational, and it's wicked. Wicked. And they've got 250,000 troops massed over there because one man, Paul Wolfowitz, has decided they want to go. I can't imagine that one man could instigate this most horrendous situation. One man. He's brutal and he's smart. And that's how wars always happen, from Alexander the Great to Napoleon, they're all killers. And history is written by the victors, who are killers. And we've got to stop killing, or we will kill the planet. We have got to stop killing. Do you get it, or don't you? Sorry, I might look passionate, but I'm terribly passionate. You said two other things, though. You're Irish, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. What were the two other things you said?
It was about your media campaign.
The media campaign. Well, you're right. The media's infotainment now. I had breakfast with Peter Jennings the other day. Very nice, highly intelligent Canadian. And he took notes, took the book, and then I saw him on television that night. It was absolute rubbish that he was reporting. You can't find decent news. But he's not in charge. Who owns ABC? Disney. You know, Goofy and Mickey Mouse. And they're only into making money. How dare they? You know, and then I was going to be on Donahue, who's an old friend of mine, and I was going to have 10 minutes alone. I got to the green room, and they said, you've got 5 minutes. And I said, why? They said, well, you know, you've just got 5 minutes. So they put the separation of the Siamese twins on for 20 minutes. It was so boring. I mean, Siamese twins are important, but what I'm talking about will induce and increase the incidence of Siamese abnormalities, right? So they cut me down. And who owns NBC? GE. What does GE do? Brings good things to life, like nuclear weapons, nuclear satellites, nuclear power plants, and a few irons and toasters. And then there's CBS, and that was owned by Westinghouse, that does the same thing. So you're right. That's another reason we need a revolution. But if we've got to stop being passive. Look, everyone does this. They just lie down. And everyone plays dead. And I walk past these lovely houses in Cambridge, and all the television sets are on, so everyone's being brainwashed, and their brain waves are turning into alpha waves, and the stuff goes through the left brain, no time to think, and lodges in the right brain, influencing behaviour even though people don't know, using subliminal psychology with the best psychologists in the world, employed by the Madison Avenue corporations, to do great damage to the planet. Our babies are being brought up using the electronic babysitter. So instead of their engrams being developed in the hippocampus by communications and mothers and fathers and singing and playing bridge and running around and weeding, they're being brought up by this stuff coming out of the television. What's that doing to their psyches? And then they're inheriting this most extraordinary dangerous world. So I'm in Mass General last night, and I look across the Charles, and there's MIT. And what are those characters up to? Much of the funding comes from the military-industrial complex. How dare they? So we're giving birth to a baby, and I'm in the Mass General, one of the best hospitals in the whole world, and I was on the faculty at Harvard. So proud I am of the Boston medical system. And I look across the thing, and they're about death. Now, they're not all about death, but peripherally, many of them are. And the buildings are, and they're being built by corporations for more death. There's a huge amount for Star Wars now being ladled out to these corporations. Mass Avenue's been rebuilt. They've even bought the wonderful confectionery company. And they're building, a high-tech company there, probably about death too. You see, I once called Route 128 America's death highway, and it was. And it still is. Now, many of us have got shares in these corporations, right? So we're sort of between and betwixt, between a rock and a hard place, between the devil and the deep blue sea. The whole thing needs to be re-examined, otherwise we'll blow up the planet. Sorry about that, but...
Thanks.
Yeah. I have one last question, please.
And then we're finished.
Yep.
Sorry if you feel I'm ranting at you. Pull it down.
It's okay.
Okay.
It'll be fine.
Let's see. I heard that...
If you could let go of the mic, please.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Great.
Depleted uranium weapons were used in Afghanistan, and yet on the other hand, the Bush administration seems to value oil. So if
nuclear weapons are used in the Middle East, won't that eventually contaminate the oil? And if the oil is contaminated, wouldn't that make it unusable? So how do you think the Bush administration is going to resolve this conflict? Is holding off on using nuclear weapons or
Depleted uranium is not terribly radioactive unless it gets right inside the body, because it emits alpha particles, 2 protons and 2 neutrons, which can damage a very small volume of cells, induce mutation and cancer. So radioactive oil with a bit of uranium in it is not much of a worry, and in any way uranium is a natural element in the soil, and some oil would have some uranium in it. It's spreading it all around and then contaminating the water supplies, and especially as it's being spread around the desert and blowing up in the desert sand for the rest of time and getting into people's lungs. It's the dispersal of the material so it can get into contact with human beings and bodies that's so dangerous. If they use a nuclear weapon in nuclear bunker buster, that's not going to contaminate much oil. I mean, it'll blow up the bunkers but produce a huge amount of fallout, the fission products. Your question's sort of valid, but not terribly specific to oil. Do you understand? Because the oil's deep underground and has to be pumped up for a long way.
What information do you have about the use of nuclear weapons in Afghanistan beyond what I just mentioned? I mean,
well, I don't have any.
Oh.
I haven't read anywhere that they actually used fission or fusion weapons in Afghanistan, atomic or hydrogen bombs. But I've just read that they did actually use depleted uranium weapons, but it was one report and it hasn't been verified yet, and I'm waiting for verification. I wouldn't be a bit surprised. They used them in